Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started here. The room isn't necessarily set up for two presenters, so it's going to seem a little bit awkward. That one, we're going to project a little louder than you might feel like is necessary for what we're saying, and we're going to kind of stand in the field of view of this camera because it's being filmed for others to be able to watch later. So if it looks like we're presenting in that awkward fashion, that's why. Good afternoon. My name's Bob Horton. I spoke a little bit earlier today, but by way of introduction, I'm the Fire Chief, Jackson County Fire District 3. I come from Southern Oregon. I've been there for 5 years. Prior to moving to Oregon, I worked and grew up in the fire service in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I was born and raised. Spent 17 years with the Las Vegas Fire and Rescue Department. And left there as assistant fire chief over areas of operational support like communications, training, logistics, health and wellness programs, EMS, everything that wasn't a field operations. Battalion chief deal is an area that I had some responsibility for. Known Jeff, my buddy Jeff here for a long time. We went to paramedic school back in the early 2000s together. Worked for different fire departments. I worked in Las Vegas. He worked in the city of North Las Vegas. And we just became friends in medic school and just grew up solving all the world's problems around, the kitchen table or traveling, doing work for the executive board of the labor union at the time. Went into management administration and just had been at this for a long time. But you want to introduce yourself?
Good friend Bob. I'm Jeff. I worked in North Las Vegas for 13 and a half years. I was fire chief and actually city manager, if you can believe that. They gave me the keys to the store for about 11 months. Then I went to Clark County for 5.5 years, and then at Las Vegas Fire and Rescue for 2.5 years. Really love the subject that we're about to get into. Have had a lot of experience from executive board from a union perspective to from the perspective of city manager. So, but stipulation alert. We don't have all the answers. We're not saying that this is 100% going to work. But we are telling you that we've had some experiences, and hopefully you've got that too. So glad to be here.
When Jeff and I got together and said we'd gone to a lot of conferences, been through a lot of development like all of you have, and we said, man, there feels like there's some stuff missing. As we're on the downslide of our career as fire chiefs, we talk a lot about what did we wish we would have known better. But going into it, what isn't really taught in the general development of an executive officer. And so we've come up with a few topics: effective communication, executive decision making. How is that different than command level decision making? And then negotiations, how to be an effective negotiator. And so we've got a few different things that we hope will add value to your toolbox, whether you're an executive now or you're not or thinking about it. It doesn't matter your role in an organization. There is a strong sense that negotiation is going to be a part of it. Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman, two professors out of Harvard, wrote the book Negotiation Genius, and they said this: in our increasingly complex, diverse, and dynamic world, negotiation is being seen as the most practical and effective mechanism we have for allocating resources, balancing competing interests, and resolving conflicts of all times. That's what we want to think about while we're going to spend the next hour or so talking about the topic of negotiations. It's going to be in its broadest sense: collaboration or consensus building, working with regional fire districts on maybe a shared mutual aid agreement, or maybe you're working on some kind of policy, a standard operating procedure. How do these different agencies, when we come together, work? Collaboration, consensus building. Collective bargaining is an obvious source of negotiation. When this class comes up, people think it's sort of typically about collective. How do we sit down with a labor union and negotiate a contract? We'll talk about that as well. It is certainly part of this, but negotiation is much broader. Budgeting, going through the budgeting process, whether you're a district and you have different departments within your district that are navigating the allocation of resources for where they feel like is the greatest priority. You're going to manage that, or a city and the fire department, the fire chief's trying to allocate for funds for the fire department that might otherwise go to another city department. And then dispute resolution, moments of conflict, whether it's employee disciplinary issues or other forms of dispute. So basically, anytime you're working together with others to reach an outcome. couple myths that we just want to lay out as we're getting this set here is, negotiation equals confrontation. It does not. Sometimes negotiation ends in confrontation, but it in and of itself is not a confrontational process. It shouldn't be, and it doesn't need to be. Liars make great negotiators. We will always advocate for being honest and above board while you're in a negotiation. Generally speaking, when you're negotiating on an issue where the relationship matters, lying or in some cases just being deceitful is not a recommended strategy. But if you go to negotiations training in a business school, they will teach you where deception is effective in negotiations. From an ethical standpoint, I don't think ever being deceptive, certainly not in public service, is a good idea. But if you're going in to trade your car in, and you know how many wrecks it's been in, or the person selling you a used car knows its history. We got a little Carfax these days, and then we didn't used to. But that's the point of the story, is a history. There's information asymmetry in that type of a relationship, trading in a car, buying another used car from someone else, where one side knows more about than the other side, and the strength and power in that negotiation is the information you know. So here, a myth is that liars will make a great negotiators. I would disagree with that, particularly when relationships are at stake. And the more power you possess, the easier the negotiation.
Or the more experience you have, the easier the negotiation. Anybody in here done some negotiations before? Yeah, a little bit with bargaining groups? Yeah. I mean, what's your comfort level on how you feel you're a negotiator? Scale of 1 to 10.
Kind of depends on the year. I'm
Okay.
negotiating.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough. A little bit of variability.
Uh-huh.
All right. I feel like I'm a pretty good negotiator. I got dirt underneath my fingernails. I've got a little bit of experience. How about in the family realm when you're negotiating? How you feel there?
Terrible.
Terrible. All right. So I like to think that I've done a few things, man. I'm gonna own this at home. I got a 17, a 15, and a 4-year-old. Anybody? All right. So that's what I have at home. I'm very lucky to have 3 children. Excited about that. So my 4-year-old, he's just getting into the spin of things. He's doing a little bit more school. He's doing preschool now, and he's talking a bit more. And I'm in charge. I'm dad, right? So I come in. It's nighttime. He's laying in bed, ready to go. BJ's his name, Paxton. BJ, all right. That's the way it's going to go, man. You got 2 minutes, buddy, to watch more of the TV. He gives a little head tilt, gives me those brown eyes. He says, Daddy, 5 minutes? Done. That's the extent of my negotiation. Just deflate right there. And I'm like, that's all I got. Negotiations are everywhere in your life. Friends, family, at work. And here's the spoiler alert. You're going to get a lot more opportunities to fail at negotiations at home. So when we're talking about these things, you're all this is the Chiefs State Conference, right? And we're talking about using these in the workplace, but the reality is you're going to get much more opportunities to use them in other places. And that last one is a huge myth.
So we'll level set a little bit so we're all on the same playing field while we're talking through some of these concepts. Types of negotiation. Distributive negotiations, that's claiming value. That's zero-sum game. In order for me to win, you have to lose. The pie is fixed at that stage. There's only so much money in the budget. It's going to be sliced and diced and allocated in a certain way. That is called distributive negotiations. Integrative negotiations is creating value. That's when you're working back and forth between two or more parties, looking at various interests. What is it we're trying to accomplish through this negotiation? And by being able to do an interest-based approach to it, you can create value. This is growing the pie. How can we work together to grow the pie? We'll talk about some examples of that. And then finally, investigative negotiation is exactly as it sounds. It is an information gathering adventure. We will take you through negotiations as in these two components. We're going to talk about people, ourselves, and others that we're in a negotiation with, and then a process for negotiations. Jeff will take us into strategies for dealing with people.
Go ahead and spin it out now. Okay, I'll spin it. So I'm just going to go right into something called emotional intelligence. Anybody heard of emotional intelligence before?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, let me give a huge of what it's not. It don't mean that you're the touchy-feely guy. It doesn't mean that you're always hugging everybody. It just means that you're in tune with your emotions and what other people are feeling, and that could be a huge benefit in whatever your situation is. And so the way that I like to give or pass on some of the presentation that we do is we like to pass on some models. So there's a lot of different models out there when it comes to emotional intelligence, and I'm going to give you one by a guy named Daniel Goleman, and he's actually refined it, but it's only 5 words, so that's why I like to use it. And it's self-awareness, self-motivation, self-regulation, empathy, and then relation management. We're going to hash out a little bit inside of there and give maybe even a couple of more models. Let's start with self-awareness. Self-awareness means, do you know what your limitations are? And in particular, on the emotional side of things, do you know what your triggers are? Who likes to be called stupid? Right? There's not going to be one of you that raises your hand. How about this? Anybody like, who's at a chief officer level in this room? Okay. Who's at a company officer? Okay. It really doesn't matter, because what I'm about to tell you, I think, is applicable to anyone, whether you're in a leadership role or not. Who likes to be told they don't care? Anybody? Oh, we're batting 1,000. That can be something that triggers you into anger, anxiety, come up with an emotion. The idea is that you're emotionally self-aware to know where you're at. It could mean, I'm overly happy right now. You don't want to be super joyous about so-and-so who failed the engineer exam, because that would be inappropriate, right? So it's about understanding your emotions. That's self-awareness. Now let's talk about self-management. Any thoughts on what that one means? What do you think about self-management?
If you know your triggers, plan for the triggers, and then execute the plan.
There you go. There you go. And on the two sides of this, we're talking about self-regulation and self-motivation. So self-regulation, in a nutshell, is restraint. How hard is that for anybody in this room? Anybody?
It can be really hard.
It can be really hard, right? I mean, is it difficult when someone tells you that you're stupid, you don't care, you don't love me, to not have an emotional reaction? And we're talking about the workplace here. So you have someone you're engaged with, whether it be a subordinate or a fellow employee, and they say something that triggers you. We're going to talk a little bit more about triggers in a couple of slides, but it's difficult. It's difficult to have that restraint and not say some of the things that you want to say. But you can't get the toothpaste back in the tube, can you? Especially at home, right? Now don't forget, the petri dish that usually we're all dealing with is at home. It's that significant other. It's the parent-child relationship. It could be mom and dad. It doesn't matter. Some of the things that we say can be super hurtful, can be super negative, and you can't get it back. Restraint. Self-motivation. What's that mean to everybody? Anybody? What's that mean to be self-motivated to you?
Initiative.
Initiative. How about this class? Everybody in here is self-motivated. I think. Anybody in here have to come? Okay, good. If you did, you're lying. I appreciate it. It looks better on the presentation, right? But self-motivation, you have that internal fire. You have that internal ignition temperature. You are going after it on your own. That's self-management. You know when to stop, and you know when to push forward. Now let's talk about social awareness or empathy. Now, what does empathy mean to anybody in this room? Don't even overthink it. If you're familiar with the word, what would it mean to have empathy for someone?
Understanding someone's situation.
It's like caring about them. It's like a deep level of care, right? Do you right now, for those of you that are company, this is kind of a two-way question. Some of you are, bless you, some of you are company officers or in leadership roles. Cool. Some of you aren't. Does anybody, do we see the importance of caring about employees, firefighters? Yeah, I see a lot of heads shaking yes. What happens when The belief or the feeling is that the supervisor doesn't care about firefighters' employees. What happens?
Morale tanks.
I'm sorry?
Morale tanks.
Morale tanks. Anybody else?
Loss of morale.
Loss of morale, right?
Reduced productivity.
Lost productivity, the
Problem.
whole shebang, right?
Your problem.
When someone in a leadership role, and sometimes it's really difficult. Bob and I have talked about this a lot. Sometimes it's really difficult. You get to a fire chief role, you're making decisions that you believe illustrate in actions that show care, but yet it's not felt that way. So sometimes that's a really difficult obstacle that you have to try to overcome. But at the end of the day, what you said is exactly right. When people don't feel like they're cared about, there's this mathematical kind of equation that happens. They don't care about you, right? If you don't care about me, why should I care about you? So empathy is the underpinning, the fundamental building block for emotional intelligence. If you're going to take anything from this class, just know that empathy is super duper important. All right, now we're going to move over to relationship management. And I'm going to give you some models, again, some takeaways. First, I'm going to give you, like when you're talking about relationship management in a leadership role, or again, even at home, I'm trying to motivate my kids, or motivate myself for that matter, but motivating my kids, persuasion is something that you have to gain a better understanding of. I'm not talking about manipulating people. I'm talking about trying to nudge them in a direction that could be beneficial organizationally or at the home tribal unit for where you are. And there's a couple of techniques. Has anybody heard of pathos, ethos, and logos? Anybody heard of that before? Okay, so that's Aristotle's modes of persuasion, and I'll distill it down for you. Pathos, your ability to inspire emotion. Can you drive people? Can you connect with them? That is pathos. Ethos, you got some street cred? You at the vacation station? Or have you been there and done that? Do you have something that you can illustrate that you have credibility? It could be all the training that you're in. It could be who you are as a dude or a dudette. But establishing credibility can help you have persuasiveness. And then finally, logos. Are you logical? Do you have a level of intellect? I ain't saying you have to be Einstein. That doesn't even do any... there are a few people in the world that elevate their intellectual capacity to that level. That's not what I'm saying. But you have to show a level of logic, a level of sequencing that makes sense. If you don't make sense, it's very hard to persuade people. Has anybody heard of Robert Cialdini? Robert Cialdini has 6 principles of persuasion. The first is reciprocity. Anybody, is there an Olive Garden around here? That you guys might know. Where's the nearest? Has anybody not been to Olive Garden? Okay, so we got 100%. What's the coolest thing about Olive Garden? And you get it at the end of the meal. Say again?
To-go box.
Oh, that's true. Come on. What?
Free stuff.
The little bit. The little green Andes mint, right? Those are super good. I don't even know where you can get those things. Only at Olive Garden. Anyway, the bottom line is, they give you those, and you didn't even know it. I didn't know it either. Who knew? More than likely, or what the evidence says, is you're tipping more, because you got a gift. Reciprocity. When you say thank you to someone, do they say thank you back? When you're walking down the street, you say hi to someone, say hi back. Reciprocity. Persuasion. Number 2, consistency. Do you say what you do and do what you say? These are ways to establish that you're going to be consistent. And that is a way to persuade people. That guy or that girl does these things, and they know that there's going to be follow through. Social proof. What's Billings doing? What's Bozeman doing? What's Butte Fire Department doing? Anybody here make policy based on what other people are doing? Yeah or no?
Just copy paste. Steal.
Yeah, copy and paste, right? You don't have to use all that intellectual horsepower just to put your signature on Butte Fire. My God. Pick up a phone and call Bob. Call me. We may have gone through this before, but you call Bob, you call me, you call Butte, you call Bozeman, and if they're doing it, it must be decent. That's a mode of persuasion. Liking. Being similar, right? Being similar. In addition, likability. Who has heard, I don't care if people like me? Anybody heard that before? Okay, you shake your head yes. Anybody watch Survivor? Yeah. What happens when you're not likable, people? You get voted off the island. I got news for everybody. We're talking about leadership. I'm not saying that you have to, again, give hugs to everybody, but if you are not likable, you will not be followed. I'm not talking about in the fire ground. I'm talking about in the station. I'm talking about during those times where lives aren't in jeopardy. You have to be likable. And let me give you a couple ways to improve your likability. One, cooperation. Are you cooperative? Or does it always have to be your way? Or the highway? Oh, I'm a captain, I'm a lieutenant, I'm dad. 2 minutes. Right? No, you gotta be cooperative. Common ground. Do you like books? Do you like movies? Do you like Sports Center? Are you a truck guy or gal? Do you really like medicine? Do you really like ICS? Find common ground with people. Those are two major instruments that you can use for building likability. Cooperation and, what did I just say? Let me see if you pay attention. Common ground. And the third one is complimentary. Don't be afraid to give compliments and do your best to not just say, good job. It's hard to do. Kids come back, oh, good job, you got a good grade. Try to give them a little bit more. Oh, wow, I can see all the studying that you did, JJ. I can really tell it was a difficult subject for you. Who likes math? But you put the work into it, and you got a good grade. Wow, you couldn't throw that ladder 2 weeks ago. You clearly have been putting in the work in order to better yourself as a professional. Give power thank yous. Be complimentary. That is a way to improve your likability. Authority. Everybody in this room. Anybody not work for a fire department? Okay. Do we have volunteer fire department in the room? Okay. And we have paid fire department, right? Let's talk volunteer fire department. I guarantee, I saw your head shake, yes, volunteer fire department. I guarantee, tell me if I'm wrong, I guarantee people in your circle want to know what you have to say on almost any topic. Do you believe that you have influence over the people that are in your sphere? Do you believe that to be the case? I'm not.
Yeah.
You do. Well, what the research shows is that just because you're a firefighter, that's part of the reason that you have influence, because you have authority. You wear a badge. Police officers, firefighters, just by having that, you have influence. Bob and I were having this conversation earlier. Bob's a big education guy, so am I. There's not going to be anybody that calls me doctor anywhere. But I do have it in my card. I do have it in my bio. Why? Because of authority. It establishes some credibility, and that's what the research says. You don't go around brag about it, boast about it. Hey, I need to be called. I mean, I didn't even like being called captain, truth be told. My name's Jeff. But the reality is there can be some influence you can have in certain situations when you have credibility, and you can do that through authority. And another example I'll provide to you, everybody in here has been to see a physician at some point in life. Has anybody not seen the credentialing on the wall? Everybody's seen it. Would you be a little scared if you went in there and the walls look like this? You're like, wait a second, is this really where I want to be in getting treated? So authority. And then finally, scarcity. Scarcity. If you don't buy this today, the price is going to go up. Does that influence chiefs to buy or someone else to make a purchase? We see it when we're buying a vehicle, but you also see it when you're buying Pierce or Spartan. Hey, we gave you this quote. You better do this or the price is going to go up. My experience, and I don't know if Bob's has been similar, man, it's crazy. Because sometimes you don't make those time frames and you still wind up getting the sale at the exact same place. They're trying to influence you to buy now. So, That's the principles of persuasion. Now, Scarf is by a guy named David Rock. And so what I want you to understand about this is where it also has a nexus to emotional intelligence. Every single one of these creates a potential threat response. If you go in and start talking about someone's status, you have to understand that they could possibly react in a way that's not going to be awesome, right? If all of a sudden you are, 'cause Bob and I like to say that in the fire service, there's a lot of autonomy, right? But we're going to talk about that in just a second. But there is a bit of independent contracting that each of us got to do as a firefighter, even as a captain. You're at your own fire station. You're doing your own thing. Well, imagine a scenario where you don't have a battalion chief at your station, and now all of a sudden, the first time in history, you're going to have your battalion chief there, and you're a captain, and now all of a sudden, your influence can be diminished. That can create a threat response because you are impinging upon someone's status. So that's the S. C, certainty. We heard it yesterday from, anybody see Dr. Freeman's presentation, where the two things that firefighters, the two standards, right? We always say that the same thing that Dr. Freeman said yesterday, which is we don't like the way things are, we don't want to change, because we don't know. COVID, uncertainty. The whole world was upset because we don't know what's going to happen next. You know that when you're going to make a change in your organization, uncertainty could drive a threat response. How do you solve that? Try to provide some information. Try to provide some information. Give them an explanation. Give them a portion of the why, which we're going to talk about here in just another minute. Autonomy. If you threaten someone's ability to work independently, that can create a threat response. So know that. Know that when you're talking about, hey, we're just gonna add a supervisor over here, or we're gonna change you up, and you have to be here at this time and here at that time. You're threatening someone's autonomy, and that could be an area for them to push back. Relatedness. Do you have any idea what I'm going through? Have you ever been a firefighter? Have you ever been a medic before? Have you ever been an engineer? If you've never been any of that, sometimes as chief officers, if that's the case, you can have a difficulty in trying to get policies and procedures through. So you have to work at ways to find common ground. And fairness. If you threaten anybody's level of fairness, hey, what you're doing for this person is not the same as you do for this person, just know that you will have a more difficult time to persuade them to do whatever it is that you are trying to do. And so this last tidbit I'm going to give you is a way to kind of distill it all down. Anybody heard of ethology before? I hadn't till about 3 years ago. And it's a study of animals in their own natural habitat. And so Cialdini actually talks about it in one of his books. And anybody happen to know what the arch enemy of a turkey is? It's a polecat. I'm not even sure if I've seen a polecat. Have you seen a polecat? No, okay. Anyway, so the story goes, turkeys are incredibly maternal. And when they hear the cheep cheep of their chicks, they will move everything out of the way to violence to get to that chick in order to mother that chick. They do that because of the cheep cheep, chirp chirp. And so as the experiment goes, the arch enemy of the turkey is a polecat. So they took a stuffed polecat and they implanted a voice recording of a turkey chick. And what happened when the cheep, 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 cheep? The maternal turkey, the mom turkey, went right to that polecat. Why would anyone in their right mind go to their arch enemy where more than likely they're going to die? It's a trigger. Rewind back to the beginning of this conversation. I said everybody in this room needs to know what their emotional triggers are. Oh, you're stupid, I don't care. Those types of things. But there's one more nuanced trigger that I want to give to you. If you don't remember Scarf and Aristotle's mode of persuasion, and who's this Cialdini guy? Remember one thing, the word because. If you use the word because, evidence shows that you will be more persuasive.
We go present in Las Vegas. We do a class together. We're there for 3 days. 2 of the 3 days we're at lunch at the Olive Garden. This guy loves him some Olive Garden.
It's a good sound.
All right. So the next phase is we're starting to think about people. Is how do we think? This is metacognition. How do we think as people? And when we're talking about negotiations, negotiations at the end of the day is going to lead into a decision. It's a decision in the space of uncertainty. Your chief officers are as you do in a company officer perspective, the larger and different scale as executives, we're making decisions on a forecast, what we perceive to be a forecast for the future. So most importantly, before we get to that, we got to understand a little bit about our brains. We do not like, as humans, we do not like uncertainty. We need to fill in, we feel like we have more control over the future than we really do. In the fire stations, if we get a little bit of information but not the whole story, we fill in the blanks. And we make up our own story. And that's how it must be, right? Because we don't like having gaps in information. We don't like uncertainty. Fact of how we think. We prefer a causal view to the world to a probabilistic view. We attribute cause where a correlation might exist. We, again, tend to think that we have more control over the outcome than we really do. We over-rely on the inside view, which leads to overconfidence. I'll talk about that in a second. So we do a class on decision making. This is a slide out of it, so I'm going to try to narrow down what we talk about for an hour into a slide or two. How to optimize the decision environment. Those that are in the career service, are you in collective bargaining agreements? Everybody is. Do I have districts here? And districts, I got one district. Cities, the rest are cities. Do any of you do the negotiating in your organization? So you're on negotiating teams. So you sit with the city leadership generally, not like HR or somebody?
We sit with board of trustees and the fire chief.
And the fire chief? Okay. Similar?
We sit with the city.
City?
Yep.
Negotiate with the city. City. Same here? City?
Fire district.
You're the district. Okay, so the fire board or the fire executive team and you all negotiate. I'm a fire district. We'll talk a little bit about collective bargaining as we go into this space. And I'll just give you tactics of the teams that I negotiate with and why I think they're ineffective, but I don't know your all's environment, so take what you like. But what we encourage here is to shift from binary thinking. Binary thinking is that it's either A or it's B. It's right or it's wrong. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. The concept of resulting is judging the quality of a decision based on the outcome. And I grew up as a fire officer in a less sophisticated time than what we're in today, thank goodness, because our measure of success is as long as the fire went out and nobody got hurt, we did a good job. And we believed that, right? And we came out the fire, nobody got hurt, fire went out, we high-fived, we moved on. And we could have made a myriad of terrible decisions in that pathway. But because the outcome was perceived good, we determined that to be a good decision. That's what resulting is called. And so we want to separate in our minds the outcome from the decision. What information did we have at the time the decision was made? And then inside view and outside view, calibrating our confidence. And the optimal space is both. Inside view is your own personal background, your experience, your education you bring to the table. I'm in deep in my own community and in my organization. I know it very well. Jeff doesn't. He's in a different community. So when I call him up, which I routinely did when he was working still do now, but we communicate back and forth often, is we have a different lens on each other's issues. So as you're going through these decisions, particularly in negotiations, it's always good to have someone else's lens on what's going on. IEFF is brilliant at this. I mean, you can't negotiate a paperclip in the city of Portland, and my negotiating team for the firefighters don't know about it. They know what everybody in Oregon, right, has in a contract negotiation, because they communicate. That brings an outside view to our experience, and that's not a bad thing. Optimally, when we're looking at decisions, take your inside view and your experience and outside view, correlate it into a good prediction for the future. Binary thinking. This is where we go. We put it in one side or the other. We're forced into dichotomous decisions. It's A or it's B. We need to do this or we need to do that. And what we're going to encourage you to say is always ask, is what I see all there is? There might be a C, D, or E worth considering. Dichotomous, no information, perfect information. Right or wrong, bad or good, failure or success. I roll a program out to our organization. New RMS. Anyone image trend? Anyone roll image trend in the last year or two? What are we using for RMS? I got one nod for image trend. We're using something Firehouse, emergency reporting. We got anything good?
Emergency reporting.
Anyone roll into it? Roll recently in the last 2 years? Were you part of this? Has it been that way for? Okay. So we roll image trend January of 21, and I gave it about three months. We're going to switch to image trend. And from a fire chief perspective, you want to transition on January 1 or July 1 because it's hard to marry that. Right? It's complicated if you do March 16th when you're pulling data for in the future. Like forever, there's a small asterisk. So I put a lot of pressure on my team to get it done by January 1. And lo and behold, as you roll out a product, there's a hiccup. There's always a hiccup. In every program I've ever done in 8 years of executive work, there's always some hiccup, but my organization says failure. It didn't work, right? And I want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Got it. That's not how, what I would encourage us to do is to look more broadly. There's an entire continuum between these two sides, right? There's no information, there's perfect information. If we're on a continuum of knowledge, that there's some more space everywhere in between. And for everything over there between right and wrong, you can land somewhere in that continuum. So when I I look at it as what Annie Duke, who's a cognitive psychologist and a famous poker player, if you're familiar with her stuff, she talks about the archer's mindset. And the archer's mindset is, or if you play darts, in the center of the board is the bullseye. That's the points. That's where all the best points are. But around it are 9 other rings. 9 other rings on the archery board or on the dart board, and you get points as long as you hit the board, right? So the archer's mindset is aim for the bullseye, but celebrate when you get points. So you may not get perfect success. 90% success, 80% success. Figure out what is the right space and how you're going to measure what success looks like. All right, I think I sort of talked about it. All right, so let's go into process of negotiation. So we've left the people place. What we are thinking about now is this is how we're going to approach a negotiation. And I'll stay in the realm of collective bargaining for the purposes of your experience, and I think it might draw some more interest in what we're going to talk about. But again, negotiation is much broader than that. And this applies across the board for all of that. So we know how we are going to approach it. We're going to come in with emotional intelligence. We're going to be deliberate about the decisions, how we're going to come in and approach that as a person. We should be very well prepared as we go into a bargaining or a negotiating environment. We shouldn't leave things to chance. And again, if you don't get anything else out of this section and process, I need you to know these 2 words. Anybody heard of the ZOPA and the BATNA in your training before? Okay. The ZOPA is the zone of possible agreement. When you're going into a collective bargaining environment and maybe you're bringing out, you have a series of interests that you're bringing in front of the other side for discussion. Somewhere in this deal, you know where agreement could land. When I'm trading in a car and I've got a good idea of what I think that car's worth, I have come into my mind into that bargaining session with the car dealership, what range I'm looking for. So the zone is establishing the range. BATNA is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. What happens if we don't reach agreement in this bargaining session? What happens? I'll just admit to you, I might lose some room. I'm not a fan of the 4896 work schedule. It was in front of our bargaining. So our bargaining group had piloted, the longest pilot, I think. Has anyone piloted a 4896 longer than 3 years? It was the longest pilot in the history, I think. Nobody has refuted me on that. Yeah,
That's a negotiation strategy.
yeah. This is before I came in as fire chief. I came in and we were during this 3-year pilot phase.
Consistency. You talked about consistency.
It was consistent. It was consistent. So we go into bargaining and the schedule comes up in conversation. We knew it was going. It was actually put in the pilot that at this bargaining session, we're going to negotiate what the schedule was. It was a subject of negotiation. Not always in every agreement, it was in ours. And so I talked to the board of directors ahead of it, and they said, listen, I feel really strongly that this is not in the best interest of the fire service. Jeff had done it in several organizations back in Las Vegas. I had seen how it had eaten away in that system. It's a very busy system with transport. We don't transport, so there's a different way to look at this lens. And the point is if we don't reach agreement on this particular topic, we may have to go to arbitration. We go to binding arbitration, right? Which is part of the process. So in our mind, when it came to at least, they do work the schedule. Spoiler alert, we negotiated, reached agreement. The schedule's part of the package. And we all felt good about it, even though I don't like the schedule. I felt good about reaching that agreement. But we went in knowing if we don't agree, this is the outcome. We're going to go to binding arbitration. There's risk to that, if you've ever been. There's risk to both sides. So you have a vested interest to reach negotiation without getting in front of an arbiter, having them decide either side of the path. Has anyone been to binding arbitration? So essentially each side puts forward their final best offer, and the arbitrator listens to arguments on both sides and chooses. You can get it all or you can get nothing. That's a risky deal, right? Yeah. Did you get it all or did you get nothing?
Well, we got it all.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, it's a risky deal. So there's a lot of interest going into to try to reach agreement, but sometimes you can't. In this environment, that's collective bargaining. The purpose for collective bargaining. Right, and because you can't strike in public safety, as a result, you get mandatory collective bargaining, and you get to that stage. We have that process for a reason. But trading in my car, right? The best alternative is I gotta leave with my car, the same car I had before, for example. Okay? So, zone of possible agreement, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Whether you're bargaining for management or you're bargaining for labor, you should approach it the same way. You've got to know what you need. Coming out of that deal, right? You've done your homework as the bargaining group. You've done your homework. You've got your outside view. You've communicated with your attorneys. You've communicated with the other, right? You know your comparables. You've done nobody does it better, right? Nobody does it better. Jeff and I were classically trained under the IAFF in negotiations. You need to know your zone. You need to know what happens if you can't agree.
Can I touch on that for just a
I
second?
wish you would.
Yeah, I want everybody to. And I'm actually thinking about some of the things that I've already said, and I'm not doing a good enough job of drawing some nexus to, emotional intelligence and how you can play with it, or how you should be in tune to it when you're negotiating. Empathy towards the other position is something that I want to be able to reinforce. When you're talking about self-motivation, when you're talking about persuasion, trying to better understand what the other party that you're negotiating with, where they're at and where you're at. And the zone of possible agreement, which I think it's important to note, is that, and I'm not sure if Bob already said this, we're led to believe that there's only option A and option B. That's what binding arbitration is, right? There's Bob or Bob, right? Well, the reality is there's a whole range of other options, including option C. Let me give you an example, and I want to really drive home that negotiating happens everywhere. It's not just at the bargaining table. It could be with your franchisee. Actually, I'm going to use the AMR. It's AMR in Montana. Okay. So we
got issues with ambulance, or do you guys have it figured out?
Oh, no, they got it.
Okay. All right.
So we go into a rather contentious franchise agreement discussion, and the previous fire chief, it just didn't work out. There was some specifics that we wanted, and there were some specifics that they wanted. And my whole approach coming in is I'm going to be transparent, I'm going to be honest. I want to hear what your zone of possible agreement is, what is most important to you, and I'm going to let you know what's most important to me. And what happened was a rather quick agreement all the way through, where we got exactly what we wanted, and they got exactly what they wanted. Now, you might look at that and say, okay, that's pie in the sky. And perhaps. But I also think it had to do with the approach. It was about being open and honest. You want this, which is going to give us a little bit of discomfort. And what we want is going to give you some discomfort. To the tune where right now their penalties are at the greatest level that they've ever been because we implemented a lot more accountability. And in addition, we changed an ordinance which would allow what's called contracted ambulance services. Anybody doing contracted ambulance services here? I see some head shaking. Okay, cool. Where are you doing that? Just curious. Bozeman's doing it? Okay. So is it with AMR?
Yeah.
How about that? Okay. But the bottom line is that, because there's other competition, I don't know if there is here as well, there was a little bit of unease for AMR. But because we put it out there, we did the zone of possible agreement, we were able to come to a conclusion.
So while you're sitting around the table, or wherever you're at in this negotiations, here's some recommendations, here's some strategies. Listen for understanding, not agreement. Talk about why you are interested in what it is that is being discussed, both sides. I explain my side, why I didn't care, for the schedule, right? My bargaining partners from the labor group, right, made their case why they felt like this was in the best interest of the organization, community, and workforce for the schedule, amongst the other things we were talking about. Listen for understanding. I want to understand why this is important. Ask a lot of what questions. Focus on the problem, not the people. This is where the emotional intelligence piece comes in for me, is knowing your own triggers. You can sense when you start to attack the other person in a process like this, it's going to raise emotion in there. In some hard bargaining scenarios, I'm trained to do that. I don't recommend that. I don't think the best outcome comes from that. But the good strategy is to focus on what the problem is, right? And not the people that are involved in that discussion. Take out the word you. Don't say you did that, right? You is very accusatory. Talk about your interests, not your position. We want a 3% cost of living, 5% cost of living raise, 10%, whatever it is, cost of living raise. To communicate in that environment, your interest is, consumer price index has gone up, the inflation is out of control, our purchasing power in the workforce is substantially lower than it was a year ago today. Our interest is to restore the quality of life that we had prior. Right? That's a very reasonable discussion to have. As you're starting to talk about your wages. The position is we want this much money and we won't, we demand it or else type of scenario. Talking about your interests is more likely to reach agreement in the end. When it comes to cost of living, you've done your math, right? You've come prepared. You know your zone of possible agreement, and I promise you the other side of the table has done the same thing. They know what they believe they can afford. It's a surprise to see a district go to binding arbitration because usually it's a bit of an easier process because the pie is fire district pie, and the municipality you're almost in this zero-sum game against other policy interests of your council. Should we build 3 more parks or should we buy another fire station, for example, right? We don't have that generally in districts. We don't have that type of competing interest. Generate additional options, seek mutual gains. This became a little prevalent when I was at the bargaining table, and wellness incentives, fitness incentives came in. If somebody passes an obstacle course in a given time frame, 2% pay incentive, something like that. I don't know if anybody's doing anything like that, but that came up across the bargaining table and said, well, we're on I see where we're headed, right? What's the interest there, right? Well, the interest is that there's some sort of wellness program that we can manage. We're approaching it with an economic theory of incentive is going to improve the overall wellness of the organization. That's the philosophy when that's pitched. Okay, let's talk about what that could look like. They didn't like my idea of an unfit tax. I said, well, what if everybody gets this pay, and then if you don't meet the standard, you get taxed 2%. Didn't like that. Same thing. It is the same thing. It's just framed different. Anyway, I joke. A little bit we talked about it. I wasn't serious about that. But are there other options that we can discuss that's not that, that can be of an interest to incentivize wellness? For example, we are able to negotiate some of our own insurance rates as a fire district and options for our employees, and we have various deductibles. What if you got a reduction in your deductible? from your health insurance if you meet whatever, insert whatever's appropriate. That's the point of generating additional options. You bring the interests in the table. We have a joint interest, a mutual interest, and a healthy workforce. What process do we want to approach by which to get to that? And then objective criteria.
Jeff, I just wanted to add just a couple more because I think we land the plane right after this.
We're getting there.
Shut up. Right? Just listen a little bit more than you're talking. That can be an advantage. Certainly on the home front, that works really well when you do a lot of listening, and it can be really tough, right? I mean, when emotions are high, that could be at the bargaining table. It could be with the, with the union. It could be with your boss. It could be with so many people. It's just, not talking is really, really beneficial. Be open-minded to changing your mind, also known as learning, right? Be ready to change your mind. It's okay. You don't have to, just because you're in a position of authority, because you're in a position of power, because you have this, that, and the other thing, you can actually bend and change, and it's okay. So give that some consideration. And also, it's not a war. When you're negotiating with someone, it isn't all or nothing. It isn't a war. It's back and forth. It's a tug of war. So keep some of those things in mind as well.
Last slide for this: prepare, be deliberate, listen, collaborate when possible. What questions have emerged that you have in terms of negotiations, in terms of process, understanding people? Are there any? Yes, sir, please.
What was the solution to the 4896 that met both sides' needs?
We're in Las Vegas. Were you talking Las Vegas? We're at.
No, it's in Oregon.
Oh, okay.
In Oregon.
Okay.
So the question is, did we reach some kind of mutual gain or growth in terms of both interest on the schedule? And we didn't. At the end of the day, when I did the math as we were progressing on this, it was a real big issue, and I didn't think I knew it was a big issue for the bargaining group. We proposed a third option. It's a schedule that Eugene Springfield is using to this day. It was very popular. Their workforce was really liked it. They had their bargaining group. Eugene Springfield's a city of Eugene's where the University of Oregon is, about 2.5 hours north of where I'm at. They were in a bargaining session a number of years back where the labor group went for 4896, and they agreed on this different schedule. So 1-3-2-3 march out. So 1 day on, 3 off, 2 days on, 3 off. That march, right? No 4 days, 3 days, but one, right? You got it. And they implemented that schedule, and they really liked it. So to this day, that's it. 4896 went to rest. 1-3-2-3 is the schedule. They've got some Kelly days that's mixed in there. It seems to work really well for their workforce. We did a survey. We asked some questions of their leadership. The management likes it. The workforce likes it. I was like, man, this sounds like this might be a good compromise. They didn't like it. My group didn't like it. At this point, we've been 3 years piloting, so it was like a loss. To go from 4896 to that is backwards. When Eugene implemented it, it was a step in a better direction. They were on the 3-4 prior to that. The 3 on, day off in between, 4 days off. That was the before, right? Which is what I grew up on. I was like, I thought that was the schedule, right? And some go like a 1 on, 2 off. Is anyone doing that? And is that a thing here too? Right? So, I mean, it depends on where you're starting and it depends on where you're ending. In that particular case, our group saw it as a loss. They didn't want to try that other schedule. In the end, I recalculated during our negotiating process the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Said, all right, what happens if we don't agree? If I don't agree, that we don't agree to this, to the board of directors? So, well, we could win or lose. We're going to go to the arbitrator at this point, and it's going to be a coin toss. And even if I win, and we go to a different modified schedule, I will have lost. As the fire chief, the organization's going to hate me, and it's going to be miserable, right? The morale's going to go in the tank. To me, at that point, the rest of the package was great. They were happy, we were happy. We met a lot of these mutual interests, so at the end of the day, I gave that in and said it's just not worth. The best alternative to the negotiated agreement is not something that I felt was in the best interest of the organization.
But what was it that was not in their best interest?
Why don't I like it?
Hours worked or Kelly's or...
The question is, why don't I like 4896? Is that basically it? It's an engage, and for us, the experience that we've had, none of it's quantifiable, easily quantifiable, I should say. There's some objective criteria, but you could poke holes in it. I could poke holes in it. It's an engagement piece. So our folks work 2 days and completely disengage from the organization. We're of a size where we do depend on mandatory emergency callback during multiple alarm events. Nobody comes back to work. Right? And not because they're at home and they hate the job. They're not at home because it's a summer in Oregon. Like, what are you doing at home on a 4-day? You should be out in Bend, right? You should be out with right, camping in a way. So our model struggled with that schedule, and we did what you think would be reasonable at this point. We changed the model. Okay, we're gonna have to approach it differently. So that was just one of my hangups. I don't think extended long work periods are really healthy for the workforce when sleep deprivation, poor decision making that occurs. You make a good argument both sides about how busy, whether you transport or you don't, how busy you are, and I think there's some credibility to that discussion. But those are areas that concern me.
So would that roll into also not appreciating the 4 platoon schedule, 2 days and 2 days on, 6 days off?
Fourth platoon hasn't come up in not much in Oregon. It's very big in Washington, just north of us. It's not come up in Oregon. I am interested in a 4th platoon, but in a different staffing model. We've tried some alternative staffing for those that don't want to work 48 hours straight, because there are a bunch of folks in the workforce that don't like it. We've introduced peak demand hours, 12-hour days, like day shift work. It's 2 on, 2 off, 2 on, 3 off. It's a kind of funky schedule there too. It's a 40-hour work week. When it balances out, and that's become pretty popular too. So that's not a conventional 4th platoon, but we
Stacked though, like you have a 4896 or a 2448, and then you have an impact or that 12-hour staffing that sits on top of that schedule, like they run congruently, or just 12?
I'm not sure I understand.
Now, I think if I'm understanding right, I think what he's saying is you still have firefighters that are working 4896, but you've implemented this other 12-hour schedule so that they run congruent at the same time.
Where you like staff up through peak call volume
Yeah.
hours, and then you drop staffing as your call volume goes down.
I think I
Just like
understand.
an ambulance
There's
service.
always 4 engines in service, and then during the 12-hour time, there's 5.
Okay.
And then at 7:30 at night, they clock out, and now we're back to 4. That's
we brought out a truck or whatever for the day. I think we're talking about the same thing.
okay. I
You have
think
two different schedules running at the same time.
Yes, we do.
That's right.
Yes, we do. And that seems to be popular. So those that don't want to work the long days can work this type of deployment unit, which I think is the best of both worlds at this point. Any other questions? We really appreciate your time. We're going to give Steve some time to set up for his presentation after this. We knew you had a choice to do something today, and we're really grateful that you spent your afternoon with us. Here's some recommendations. If you like this topic and want to learn more, these are some of the references for our presentation today. These are all great reads. Again, irrespective of your rank in the organization, you are negotiating somewhere in some aspect of your life, and these tools will help you reach success more frequently.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciated your time.
Any questions or follow-up you have, please. We're really happy to talk about this topic or anything else we can be valuable. Our goal at this stage of our career is to try to be helpful to other leaders. So anything we can do, please don't hesitate to reach out. Just say we met at the Montana Chiefs and jog my memory. Thank you all very much. Have a good rest of the conference.
Thank you.